So inshallah ta'ala we should get unfatigued, and this is why we have our dear brother Cyrus to give us some inspiration, give us some information on where are we now and where to go from here. So with that, inshallah, I'll pass on the mic and you can go ahead and get started. Bismillah.
Bismillah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Everyone, brothers, sisters, elders, teachers, thank you. I'm very grateful to be here today. Very grateful that you all came here and you trusted your time to us. Inshallah, I hope that it's not a waste. Inshallah, we make the intention that this is a majlis of dhikr, a majlis of ilm, inshallah, and hoping for the reward of these majalis. Allahumma ameen. I wanted today, lay out a couple signposts. I'm not a sheikh. I'm not an imam. I am a social scientist. I am in years past, I tried, over the years to organize and to support our Islamic political work and our social work over the course of, somehow it's been almost 15 years. It's crazy to think about. And now, as Fatah said, I've been in Istanbul for the last 9 years, alhamdulillah. Still visiting, coming back to visit, coming back to work. But I've benefited also from that distance, from the perspective that brings, the clarity that we are allowed when we get some distance from America, from this belly of the beast. Allah says in the Quran, among the believers are men and women, men who are true to their covenant with Allah. Some of them have fulfilled their vow and some are still waiting. They have not changed in the least. Now, I want to begin with our mission, our personal mission and our political mission. Allah said to the angels that I'm going to place a Khalifa on the earth. Of course, they asked Allah, as you know better than me, asked Allah, will you place someone there who spreads corruption and sheds blood when we glorify you and praise you? Allah responded that, I know what you do not. Allah says elsewhere in the Quran that had Allah not repelled a group of people by the might of another, corruption would have dominated the earth. But Allah is gracious to all. This khilafah that Adam alayhi salam was given is, on one level, a personal mission, a civilizational ethic that each of us has as an individual. Khilafah is not dominion, it's not mulk, the dominion which is Allah's. And as in the book of Genesis, of the Old Testament, they translate it as dominion that has been given to Adam, Islam. But in the Islamic understanding, we have our position here is khilafah, which implies not control as much as a caretaking. There's authority in it, but a taking care of, a stewardship. And khilafah also, in the tafsir of that verse and others, khilafah is also the authority which the Muslims unify to manifest and to protect. The authority, the highest level of social organization by which Islam and the order of Islam is offered to the entire world. That part of our caretaking is to take care of it the way that it was intended by its creator. And this was embodied most perfectly by the establishment of the prophetic authority in Madinat Munawwara, the enlightened city. The Prophet ﷺ predicted, he prophesied that khilafah on his way, on his method, would last for 30 years, after which Allah would give the dominion to whoever he wills. But despite its shortcomings and its divisions, khilafah continued as an institution. Some of those khulafa, some of those imams, those leaders of the Muslims, fulfilled the highest standards, as best as they could of that khilafah. Of course, some did not. But throughout that history, there were righteous leaders, first from the companions and the followers of the companions and the family of the Prophet ﷺ, that demonstrated with their lives that authority, that the imamate was to be fought for when the time was right by the most deserving. And there was always a consensus on the importance and on the obligation of the Muslims unifying to have a leader. 100 years ago, literally exactly 100 years ago to this year, was the culmination of growing number of centuries of defeat, and the establishment, in the wake of that defeat, of Israel as a trophy and as a permanent watchdog. In the shattering of the Ottoman Khilafate, the Muslims of those lands and others scattered a bit, but Islam survived and thrived throughout this last century, right, as a force of resistance. It emerged towards the end of the Cold War and after the Cold War as really the only living threat to Western hegemony. By the late 1970s, Islam was the driving force of anti-colonial struggle, of anti-Zionism, even anti-Americanism, from without and from within. It was a viable political belief and practice. And Islam, with its rising international revolutionary movement, built right here with the descendants of enslaved Africans, right, of the school of Malcolm X, who were honoring their calling as Muslims of the frontiers, this Wild West, this wilderness of North America. It was these intersections, right, that the war on terror was always about quelling. Its architecture begins in the 1960s to the 1970s, the 80s, developing a legal structure in the 1990s, and then trying to use the spectacle of 9/11, right, as a defining moment to shape the generation that would come. But these threads, the black radical Islamic tradition of the school of Malcolm X, the revolutionary Islamic movement, one success of which is the success of the Iranian project with the Islamic Revolution of Iran, right, of Ayatollah Khomeini, and then the successful Sunni jihads of Afghanistan, of Bosnia, and some not so successful, but Algeria and others around the world. From east to west, Islam was rising again after decades, even centuries, where the main theory, the social scientific theories, all assumed that Islam as a force of organizing was on its way out. But in the 1970s, again, Islam reared its head. And in the 25 years since 9/11, this war, so-called war on terror, we have suffered and survived millions of people dead and displaced, the military, political, media control over the Muslim world, invasion, repression, counter-revolution, much of it aiming at the normalization of Israel, at the protection of Israel. And despite that, despite all of those efforts, the survival of the Muslim street, that despite oppressive, repressive rulers, many of them puppet governments placed inside the Muslim world by these anti-Islamic interests, the Muslim street remained active. More successful than the war on terror's goals abroad, more successful than that for the United States government, was the development of a more compliant domestic U.S. Muslim citizen. A compliant U.S. Muslim citizen that identified more and more with America, that had given up hope of stopping the U.S. war machine and of freeing prisoners. These were no longer a priority. Compliant American Muslims that identified with the politics of Pharaoh's court, this party or that party, this interest or that interest, this identity or that identity. And over those 25 years, I mean, many of us, all of you heard many times throughout those years the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he warned his companions that the people will summon one another to attack you as people inviting others to eat from a dish. And as that report goes, someone asked him, will that be because we're small in number? Are we few in number at that time? He said, no, you'll be numerous, but you'll be worthless. You'll be like the scum, carried by a torrent, carried by a wave. And Allah will take the fear of you out of their hearts and cast wahan into yours. Someone asked him, what is wahan? What do you mean by wahan? And the Messenger of Allah said, love of the world and dislike of death. And then a year ago, just over a year ago, I was in Istanbul. We woke up on a Sunday morning, and it was October 7th of the Christian calendar, 2023. Great reports, fantastical reports, stunning, really. An operation, a jailbreak by land, air, and sea, that was more successful, it seems, than even the brothers carrying it out. Imagine that it could have been. Shattering the myths that the Zionist project had spent so many years and so much money building up. to convince us of. And I'll tell you, I don't know what it was like here. Again, I wasn't here. But the Muslim world celebrated this. The Muslim world celebrated this. We knew, even in America, I think, what I saw from overseas, this is anecdotal, but even from overseas, it felt that even American Muslims knew to celebrate this, despite the 9/11 generation's instincts that had been programmed into us to automatically condemn and distance ourselves from Islamic political violence, from military resistance. And the more that we learned, the more that details came out about this October 7th operation, this Tufan al-Aqsa, this Aqsa flood, the more we loved it. The ethics, the precision of it, the discipline, the men and the women, their families. And over this last year, as difficult as it has been, the resistance, the Palestinian Islamic resistance, has embarrassed the Zionist occupiers day after day, chasing their soldiers without fear, to such the extent that then the IOF runs away from these resistors, from these mujahideen, to find civilians to massacre. And now it seems that in Lebanon, on the Lebanese front, the Lebanese resistance is doing the same thing. Israel's response to this has been to attempt a genocide, and their backers show no sign of checking them in any way. And for them to undertake this attempted genocide in public, in front of the eyes of the world, is a sign of their coming defeat. We see the signs that decolonization is underway. You see settlements in the north are dark and empty, lines in the airport in so-called Tel Aviv full of Zionists running for their real homes. The Israeli government in shambles, the American government in shambles over as a secondary effect, right, of the shambles in Israel and defending the Zionist project. 10/7 was a sign that the resistance there is not just alive, but stronger than ever. That the network behind it is not just alive, but stronger than ever. And to this day, the weakness of the Muslim leader, quote unquote, as a type, challenged by a rising Muslim street. And what I've seen and what I'm excited by, what I'm motivated by, and I do think that as this year comes around, despite our grief, despite our mourning, I think that this should also be a time of happiness, a time of excitement, a time of motivation, and a time of activation. That you all, mostly, more than me, more than us, this is a new Muslim generation that's not afraid. If we were the 9/11 generation shaped by the spectacle of 9/11, you are the 10/7 generation. I see the ways that you see the truth very naturally, the way that you don't care about the accusations of the enemy, the way that you have risked so much, your safety, your lives even, identifying parties to Zionism and protesting them, police come resisting them, occupying buildings. You all have said that your comfort is not worth Palestinian lives. This is the October 7th generation. And it's clear, and you have sent a message to my generation and those older, that the time for condemnations and slavish rule following is over. That if we're going to be outlawed, then let us be outlaws. This shift is a vindication of what many of you and this organization has known and taught. And you see this, the evidence of this also, another piece of evidence of this is the way that Muslims, young and old, have come back. And the way that people from other faith traditions, from other backgrounds, people distanced from Islam, have entered Islam over this last year. And these new converts, and even these reverts, or whatever you want to call them, Muslims returning with a renewed faith, are inspired not by the old dawah of Islam means peace, and Islam means, I'm a good American citizen, and I won't bother you, but the dignity of resistance, right? The perseverance that's been demonstrated over this last year by the Palestinian people and by their defenders. So I would say just that this is a time for greater intentions, greater efforts, preparation, and education, and action, that we go out motivated to go out and teach with love and with optimism. That this is a movement of Islam on the frontiers. Often we're infected by this idea that this is the center of the world, right? And it's not the center of our world. This is the Wild West. This is the frontiers. Our work here has really just begun. And we do this work of this dawah and struggle with husn dhan billah, like we have a good opinion of Allah, right? That Allah has promised that Islam will enter every home. And so we are grateful both for the hardship and for this opportunity that we have moving forward. I wanted to, we're going to have, in the minutes we have, I wanted to discuss a little bit among the three of us. I wanted to just end with a multi-point kind of, I don't want to call it a program, because I'm really shy to come here and preach to you and tell you what you all should be doing. But rather, you could think of it as something of a structure for how to think about how to set your goals and plan your life in a way to make yourself more useful according to wherever you are along these points, inshallah. Just food for thought, respectfully from your brother. One is to learn this deen from the old books and the good teachers, right? To read and memorize and understand the Quran and what it prioritizes, finding good teachers that don't seem afraid. Two is to focus on improving your own character, to be harder on yourself and easier on others, especially your peers and those under your care. Embrace humility through service. Whatever you notice, this is a tip that was given to me years ago, and I've tried to hold it close, that whatever you see wrong about someone else, whatever bothers you about someone else, look for that quality in yourself, because there's something about what bothers you about that in them that bothers you about yourself. Three is to get physically dangerous, get in really good physical shape. We don't always talk about this in a spiritual context as part of our Islam, but I would argue that if you are not at almost military standards of discipline and fitness, that it becomes almost a fard ayn upon you, that maybe a personal obligation to prioritize that. Prepare for everything. Be able to defend yourself and your family by all means at your disposal. Four is to marry and have children. Ignore the voices of the gender war. Our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the prophet of women were made beloved to me. He's the prophet of I am the best to my women. There are satanic voices in our society, and within the Muslim community, it's just really a microcosm of some of the fitna that is happening in the broader society, turning men against women and women against men. As a friend of mine said the other day, it's like nerds on the computer are turning into nerds in real life. Avoid those voices as best as you can. Marry and have children. These families, our families are the social blocks, are the building blocks of the society that we want to see. Five, I would say to set aside efforts to push the government, to ask this government for reform, and to rather build the society that you want to see. Do that by encouraging your brothers and your sisters to do good things together, to serve together, to worship and learn together, to focus on providing the things that we otherwise would depend on our oppressor to provide us: security, food, shelter, healthcare, education, etc. This is khilafah. This is the authority through service, right? That if we were to invest differently, if we were to invest ourselves internally and from ourselves providing outward, we will find ourselves to be a much stronger unit and much better, much closer to the revival that we all hope to see. Six, I would say that if you find yourself, this might not apply to many of us here, but if you were to find yourself in a position where you do have to engage with the state, where you do have to engage with the U.S. government or some representative of it, or you have to talk about it, you're planning votes or whatever it is, I know this is the season for this. I would suggest that we unite on certain very clear priorities that have nothing to do with really most of the games that people play with us. That we focus on stopping the war, stopping the wars on the Muslim world, on Muslim communities here and abroad. Two, freeing the prisoners, freeing our many captives, dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of Muslims and unjustly imprisoned people who are in prisons in the United States and around the world under U.S. authority. This should be one of our clear priorities. Three, to remove the invaders and puppets from the Muslim world. This is something that we would... Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله
Brothers and sisters, this QR code is for the Slido to send in your
حي
questions.
على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
Okay, I'm finished up in 1 minute if that's
Oh,
all.
yeah,
Yeah.
take it.
Okay, just that was a beautiful adhan. I hate to speak over that. The to finish this very quick list was on this issue of political priorities. Again, just to wrap that up quickly, you know, if we're dealing with this state, I prefer disengagement. I prefer breaking the allegiance of our hearts, but to focus rather on meeting them as if we are a sovereign nation, to stop the wars, to free the prisoners, to remove the invaders and puppets from our communities here and abroad, and to stop taxing us, really, or else. And 7, long term, is respectfully, for your children's sake at the very least, if not for your own, to take a step towards breaking the chains of Americanism by reconnecting with the Ummah around the world, for the benefit of us, for the benefit of the entire world, so that, you know, our Americanness, you know, does not become a limit on our imagination. It does not veil the bonds that we have with our Ummah around the world, that we don't see ourselves or our comforts or our priorities as different or as better, because we are really one body. Allah give us success. Please forgive me if I misspoke anything that I said that was wrong today. It was just something that I wanted to use to start the conversation, something of a big narrative, you know, as a historian, as a social scientist, something of a big narrative that helps us understand the opportunity that we have and the responsibility that we have to not just bring Islam here, plant the banner of Islam here in the West, but rather to carry it forward and to be part of a revival which is global, to be useful to an Islamic resistance, which is not just against, but is for something. And we're going to know that, we're going to be able to live that and honor that fully by beginning with ourselves and our families and our neighborhoods and our tribes, and growing from there, inshallah, as a seed from which grows a good tree. Ameen, Rabbil Alameen. So thank you. I don't know if we'll have time for, we'll have time for discussion and then also Q&A, inshallah. My time is yours here and afterwards, inshallah.
Yeah, Jazakallah khairan. We have just about a half hour left till Iqamah, inshallah. So first off, Jazakallah khairan for that lovely introduction. To give you guys an idea, I don't know if we gave a sufficient intro for our brother. Ahmed did say he's studying at Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul, and his specialty or his field is history and civilization and societies. so civilizational studies and so on. So basically, you've studied the rise and fall of nations and Eastern and Western, Muslim and otherwise, right? So that's where I want you guys, those QR codes that you see on your screen, that's the Slido link. So please, get it. We also shared it in the group chats. Start sending in your questions. But that's the expertise that you're dealing with. I want you guys to really give some sharp questions. And also, Mus'ab's background, of course, is politics. So the intersection between politics as well as civilization and rise and fall and so on, that's where I want you guys' minds to be at, inshallah. I'll start us off, and I hate to I hope this question is right up your guys' alley, inshallah. So my question, what I'm very curious about is, with your guys' background in terms of politics as well as history and society's rise and fall, what do you view the next 10 years being like? Well, my first part of the question would be, do you genuinely think that the stage we're in right now, this era, this past year, has been a genuine turning point, or is it more of the same? So that's the first question. Like, will it go down in history in the future, inshallah, as the times, it marked a new era in civilization? That's the first question. Second would be, what do you see the next 10 years like from the case, for Cyrus, from the case of the rise and fall of nations? We, as American Muslims, we are Western and Eastern, for the most part. Most of us have Eastern heritage and Eastern background, but born and raised here. And we were surprised in a lot of ways by many of our fellow Americans, right, who stood by and continue to stand by the side of truth at the protests and putting their livelihoods on the line, and even their lives and and their freedoms on the line. So it's a very it's a very endearing thing, and it shows us that there is good here as well, and there's opportunity for haqq and dawah. And we are also Eastern, as you said. We are part of our ummah, and that is our number one identity, and it will never change. So there's been hope, and there's been a lot of sadness and depression and negativity, but there's also a ray of hope. So do you guys think that this is a turning point? And the second question would be, where do you see the next 10 years for the East and the West? And we'll start with Brother Cyrus, and or whoever would like to start first.
Give me time to think. Yeah, you go start. You go start.
Bismillah. السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. آمين يا رب العالمين. I will mention specifically only the geopolitical aspect, the aspect that's specific to the tactical politics that have played in the last year. I'll leave the civilization to the expert, inshallah, who we have here. When we are talking about the world since October 7th, I think absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, if we look at the geopolitical landscape, if we look at the tactical politics that have happened, and when I say tactical, I mean the small changes, right? Small, not in terms of, I guess, like effect. In small, I mean short-term changes, right? Strategic is long-term changes, 5 years plus. Tactical changes are things that happen in days, months, weeks, right? If we look at the past year and the amount of tactical changes that have happened in, number one, the region, two, the world, right? The global order. Three, more relevant to us specifically because we have more control over it, inside this country, the dynamics between the people and the government, and the dynamics even within the government, every single thing has changed. Nothing has been the same. I mean, if you look just at the region, and I won't like geek out about it, but just very quickly, number one, in this past year, the United States has never sent more military aid to Israel ever, period. That should tell you that, and by the way, this isn't the first war Israel, fights, and obviously this is only a war so much as it is a genocide, but this isn't the first war that Israel fights that America supports. They've supported them in 48, they've supported them in 56, they've supported them in 67, they've supported them in 73, they've supported them in 82, they've supported them in 85, they've supported them in the 1900s, they've supported them in 99, 2003, all the different flashpoints that they've had at every single step of the way, they've had American support. However, it's this year that they've supported them with $17.9 billion only in direct military aid. That doesn't count economic support, that doesn't count humanitarian aid, that doesn't count political support. That's only in the bombs that America is signing. Yani, it's not even the bombs actually being bought. It's the deals that the American government are signing saying, we will give them this much in weaponry. $17.9 billion in 1 year. When the regular is around between 4.2 to 4.6. That's more than quadruple the amount. That should tell you that this year everything has changed. When we look at the actual countries surrounding occupied Palestine, there are two really big trends that are happening. Number one, an angry, relatively powerless people have started to re-enter the social contract. And what that means is that the people who have been on the sidelines, the majority, right, the shab, the citizenry, the people who have been on the sidelines within their own countries are now waking up with a bunch of power. And we can see this in a lot of the despotic regimes. Of course, they're despotic. They have done terrible things. Their inaction is unforgivable, and history will speak very harshly about it, and we will speak very harshly about it. But what's very clear is that they couldn't even sell out without, shame, right? They had to at least hide it under some escalated statements, even though right now this is coming after 4 years that marked a quote-unquote new era in the region where Israeli normalization between Arab countries and the Israeli state has kind of been the hallmark. So, and this is just a few things. The second thing that has really changed in the region as well is an overwhelming sense of unity and awareness. And the awareness is actually of one thing, which has really been kind of the founding myth of this idea of the Middle East. The invincibility of the colonial agent and the moral policeman, which is Israel. That myth has it completely went away on October 7th, and it has completely continued to go away every single day since. And subhanAllah, when we see the massacres, when we see, as we are speaking right now, Jabalia and northern Gaza, people there who are writing their wills online on Twitter, as we see what should be, expressions of power and assertions of dominance, everyone around them sees it exactly as it is, including America, by the way. It's signs of weakness. It's the kicking of a rabid dog on its way out. And that's what this past year has marked. It has marked, number one, the removal, or the beginning of the removal, of a massive obstacle to an Islamic revival. And number two, it has shown that there is another way possible, and this other way has yielded victory after victory after victory. Wallahu alam. I'll leave the civilizational approach to you.
Oh, those are great, very helpful thoughts. Thank you. On the point of civilization studies, I guess 2 points are worth sharing, because it's not a common way of studying history anymore in the American Academy. It's still a big deal in Turkey, and I think I've benefited from it, from thinking about history on that scale and societies on that scale. Partly it's helpful to break out of nation-state thinking and to think about ourselves as broader units. A common theme of the historians of civilizations is to look at a civilization as an organism, right, as something that starts small from a people, from a core, and from a core event or a core moment or core spirituality, an experience, right, a raw spiritual experience from which then flourishes through the spring and the summer of this civilization or culture, to use the language of Oswald Spengler. It's an interesting German historian of this subject. The rising, and the growing, the domination of its neighbors, the flourishing of a culture into a high culture. After which a point, a peak point is reached, after which people become too civilized, and this is the difference in Spengler's language between culture and civilization, that the fall and the winter are the civilizational period. Civilization, in this case, then becomes kind of a bad word. That people are too civilized. People have lost that savage or barbarian spirit, right, which allowed them to flourish and to honor their highest calling, and then also to compete with their neighbors, into a fall and then into a winter, a decline of that civilization. Although some of them, and Toynbee was a British historian of this subject, also had the theory that, civilizations don't necessarily die by themselves, but can exist in kind of a permanent freeze and a permanent winter until they are finally eclipsed by a more powerful neighbor, a more powerful competitor. I think a more native and even just better, introduction to this topic is in the work of Ibn Khaldun. His introduction, his Muqaddimah to the study of history, in which he talks about the cycles of a dynasty, for example. So it's the same, kind of mapping of a spirit, mapping of an energy from the Bedouin, right, to the sedentary, right, and back down again. And even at a generational level. And what we take from this then, I think, is what I draw from these is that we've been in a period for decades, maybe even centuries, when it's been theorized that Islam is dead, or that Islamic civilization is dead. Of course, I mean, we know Islam is Allah's deen, but Islam is a civilization with a political structure, with a social structure to it. The fullness, right, of Islam has been lost, right, has gone dormant at least. I don't like dead, but dormant at the very least. Language of Sayyid Qutb, rahimahullah, that we are back, we've returned to a period of Jahiliyyah. We've returned to an age of ignorance, of pre-Islamic ignorance in our societies, even in our own behaviors and even our beliefs. And the so-called Western civilization, the Euro-American white civilization, really Northern European in origin, has become the dominant world hegemon. And it was Oswald Spengler who wrote in like 1916, that Islam was the only surviving threat to Western hegemony. That the West was essentially, that there were no other competitors really to the West on the global stage except Islam. They knew this 100 years ago. And I believe that to be true. And I believe that even in our dormancy, that the seed of revival can come from any one of us. The spiritual experience, which is the revelation of the Quran and the prophetic experience, right, is an inheritance that reaches us today, right? The Quran through strong chains, through the Quran as we understand it, with all of its narrations, and the Hadith and the embodiment of the prophetic authority, of the prophetic example, the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That these reach us today, that we have access to these today. That this is a tremendous intellectual tradition, and this is the seed of our revival, right? And we also then, and this is why I focused, my little talk today in that way, because it's important that we also understand the continuity of our politics and of our social organization, of our social goals from the prophetic experience to the present day. That Khilafah is not just a personal mission, but rather a social mission that we work together to achieve. And so I do think that now in this time, now that Islam went through its phase of being hyper-civilized and over-civilized and into decline, into its winter, that now we find again, when we look around the Muslim world in rubble, right, that we now find an opportunity for the revival of a new generation, right, which is not, shackled, right, to the weaknesses of the previous generation. A generation who has nothing to lose. To the people that ask, why October 7th? What did they hope to gain? They say we had nothing to lose, right? And there's a reason that Hamas today is more powerful and more respected, has more support today than it did on October 6th of last year. So I do think that this is a great opportunity. I think that great things can happen. I think that this is a turning point, and there are geopolitical reasons for that also. And there's reasons that this war will probably not de-escalate. That this may map onto other global conflicts between the U.S. and Russia, for example. That's a slightly different conversation. We can go there if you want, but maybe at the very least, my focus is that as Muslims, we are called to this cause as Muslims, right? We are called to this cause by Allah, and building on to paraphrase the famous report from a quotation of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh, that we found our glory through Islam, and if we seek glory through anything other than Islam, that we will not. And I think that this is at a time of competing ideologies and nationalisms and leftisms and all of these things, that it's this Islam that will unite us and that will allow us to really attain the goals, not just of the liberation of land from its enemies, but the fullest implementation of our Islam in all the lands and all the region across the world, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khairan, guys. If I may add something as well, perhaps the number one thing that I woke up to in the past 12 months, and I want you guys to remember this for the rest of your life, is something that we all, as Muslims, we've always known through our whole life, that all these things that's said about us in the media is lies and propaganda. We've always known it, but we've known it as Muslims. You could convince your fellow Muslim, but you had a hard time convincing your friend who was not a Muslim, because he, at some level, to a large part, they really believed that stuff. They really believed we were terrorists. They really believed we mistreat women. They really believed that we were more dangerous or more barbaric or we have crazy beliefs. They believed it because the media did a great job feeding them that for decades. And we were frustrated, but we just accepted that as a status quo. Here's a mistake that I made that got cleared up in the past 12 months, and I pray that we never make this mistake again. I thought that a large part of that was organic. Their beliefs was real, like it wasn't constantly manufactured. I knew propaganda taught them that, but I felt like, there's a big divide between East and West, brown skin versus white skin, West versus East cultures. I thought, it's gonna take it took 50 years to develop these terrible beliefs. It'll take 50 years to fix them. That's the way I'll put it. That's what I believed. I was so wrong. Remember this phrase: there is a maintenance cost for batil. What is a maintenance cost? Any of you have a car? In order to run this car, you got to pay. If you open a building with the lights and the electricity and the air conditioning and the heat, if you stop paying the bills, it's by tomorrow everything turns off and you cannot maintain the building anymore. Everything in life has a maintenance cost. The more troublesome it is, the more it costs just to keep it running day by day. The batil, the falsehood that's been spread about us, I was alerted in the past 12 months about just how much maintenance cost these people are paying to keep these lies alive. And despite their costs, and when I say maintenance costs, real numbers, billions upon trillions of dollars, the Hollywood media and all of its Zionist ties, and I've shared this stat with you guys before, and I encourage you to look it up. There's an acronym MENA, Middle East North African, MENA, right? The MENA representation in Hollywood, they've done studies over the past 40 years, from the 80s till now. So anytime a Middle Eastern or North African, an Arab or Muslim is presented in Hollywood, what is the percentage of them being presented horribly or in a bad light or in a good light? What do you would say? What's the number? How often is an Arab or a Muslim presented good in Hollywood? How often are they presented bad?
10% good, 90%.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. There's different studies. They range. Some of them range from the 70s, all 70% up of bad representation, all the way up to the 90s. Meaning, like there's no way this was organic or by accident. This was targeted and intentional for decades and decades and decades. So when a person that looks like you is represented, they made sure that you look terrible, and people grew up on that. And everyone claims to be, awake and they don't fall for propaganda. No, they all fall for propaganda. We all do. I do too. We all do. But we're starting to wake up a lot more. And people of all backgrounds, Muslim, non-Muslim, all over the world, are waking up too. And all of that got undone by Allah's permission within the span of a year. I wonder what 2 years will bring, inshallah. I wonder what 3 years will bring. So if you're losing hope and you're becoming like, just losing steam and saying, well, it feels like we've been protesting, nothing's happening. They are now bombing more people in Lebanon. May Allah Ta'ala, Allahumma faraj anhum. May Allah lift the oppression and accept our shuhada. So you're saying, what did we even do? More people are dying. No, what did we even do? 2 days ago, Spain, or a few days ago, Spain is calling for an arms embargo on Israel. Correct me if I'm wrong, first time ever. France, first time ever. Correct if I'm not mistaken. That is a radical change. Several new countries have started to officially recognize Palestine. Not that we need their recognition or their approval or we're begging them for scraps. No. I'm just telling you, these people only turn after the tables have turned. They only turn under pressure. They were pressured by us, not the other way around. So if you're losing steam, keep going. Why? How could you lose steam when things are working? When Intel pulls out a $26 billion potential investment in Israel, Intel pulled it out. Do you think Intel has any morals whatsoever? 0.000 negative percent morals. They're not moral. It wasn't out of the goodwill of their hearts. It was because it was a bad investment idea. When it became a bad investment idea to invest in apartheid South Africa, they stopped doing it. And when it becomes a bad investment idea to invest in apartheid so-called Israel, they're going to stop doing it. Not because they're good people or good companies, they will never be good. They will never be good. It's just that they felt the pressure. So keep the pressure up. Don't belittle any good that you do. لا تنكرن من المعروف شيئا. Do not belittle, as the Prophet ﷺ said, do not belittle any good, because it all contributes. It all contributes, and the pressure is working. Shaitan wants to convince you that it's not. That's why they're obsessed with censorship. So my lesson that I learned, that I will inshallah ta'ala never unlearn till the day I die, wow, what a crazy maintenance cost for batil. Inna al-batila kana zahuqa. Allah says in the Quran, falsehood is very weak and flimsy. It's ever bound to perish. It took them 50 years of trillions of dollars and millions of moving parts to make them present us a certain way. They attacked us, then called us terrorists, and it worked. They would say like, oh, I was in Iraq. Some vet goes like, oh, I was in Iraq and I came upon some terrorist in his house. That's his house, in his country. Well, why is he the terrorist? But people believed it, and they believed it for decades. But now it's all falling apart. But it took them decades to build it, and it took them militaries and bombing and trillions of dollars. They lost and wasted an estimated $8+ trillion in their so-called war on terror. And now they're tossing money into Israel. I have never seen the dichotomy, or sort of the spread being so thin, where the U.S. government has spent more money on Israel in 1 year than ever before, and the U.S. populace is more anti-Israel than ever before in history. And it's only getting further and further apart. Something's going to give. Something's going to, like that can't, yes, we know that the population doesn't actually have power, at the end of it, but there is, like, something's going to give. There is a breaking point. When enough people on the right, on the left, and from different viewpoints, for different reasons and different agendas, they are saying enough is enough. Not I'm done. And subhanAllah, everything is on God's timing. These hurricanes that are coming, and people need aid. And like, it could not be, sometimes, the government with their corruption, sometimes they have to pretend to at least have some sort of dignity so the people don't rise up and kill them. But now, with the hurricanes coming and $8 billion of damage, in the same week, they sent $8 billion to Israel, they approve it, and they give the people a $700 loan so they could buy some chips. And people are like, are you crazy? Like, now this is the final. It's actually $600. Sorry. Here we go. Yeah. I offered too much. So like, imagine you are a person whose house just broke down and you lost everything. And they go like, you see the headline in the news, $8 billion sent to a foreign nation, so-called nation, and here's $600, but you got to give it back. When you're done buying that bag of chips, you got to pay us back. And they say, what is going on? So even the third party, a person who has no care for you or me as a Muslim, a person who has no humanity, they're being mobilized too. So subhanAllah, you don't know where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is changing the world. The world that took 50 years to go in one direction is taking 1 or 2 or 3 to go in the exact opposite direction. So never underestimate how quickly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will change the entire world. Never underestimate how much they're paying to maintain the falsehood. And it's still turning on them. My point, why do I say that, is that eventually they're going to run out of money. Eventually they're going to run out of resources and people and manpower to maintain the falsehood. And therefore, it will collapse faster than you think, because they don't have the maintenance costs. This thing requires constant upkeep to just even be running. What happens when they run out of upkeep and just the breaking point is reached? So keep going for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I promise you, if Allah grants us life, within our lifetime we will see major changes in the world. And we get to say on the Day of Judgment, if Allah accepts us, we get to have been a part of it at a turning point in history. And there's no greater honor than that in the history books of Jannah, inshallah. I pray that Allah includes us in it. I'll pass the mic to Ahmed for a second.
So we're going to do a quick couple of questions for Q&A. We have 5 minutes, so we're going to rapid fire them, inshallah. So first question, what books would you recommend for beginners of history for Palestine?
Well, I would expand that, just civilization, something that you think the average layman should read.
Yeah. Yeah, jump in.
So I don't have book titles off the top of my head, but I can give you authors, and you should read everything that they put out. You're going to disagree with some of it, and that's good. That's part of the process. Rashid Khalidi, definitely look into him for the history of Palestine. He has a lot of good stuff on it. In terms of Islamic civilization, I think every single person who lives in America needs to read everything Alija Izzat-Begovich has written. Specifically, everything. So Alija Izzat-Begovich, He was.
We'll share it in the group chat.
Yeah, he was also the president of Bosnia during their genocide, during their war. So very easy to find him. There are a couple of really good books he has. Islam Between East and West, Unescapable Questions, that's his, or Inescapable Questions, that's his autobiography. Everything he's written, you should read it. So Alija Izzat Begovic. Yeah, he's Bosnian. Yes.
I'll share it in the group chat.
Yeah, there's more, but I think you got to brainstorm now.
Yeah, I mean, for history and Islamic history, if you're really getting started, I mean, there's a great book called Destiny Interrupted, which is just a 1-volume, kind of general audience introduction to Islamic history, which is great. There's a series of 3 books written by a non-Muslim, I think he was a Quaker or something, Marshall Hodgson, The Venture of Islam, 3 volumes. You could get the PDF on Library Genesis. Great detail, very understanding, and of Islamic history. Yeah, anyway, we could talk more, inshallah. Yeah.
Next question. Should we be voting, yes or no?
I don't know to what extent we're allowed to answer that. Do you know on stage?
I'm
As a 503(c)?
I'm able to answer it in a personal capacity as someone who is completely unaffiliated. I don't hold a position in Mastanon. I'm barely a member. Okay, I don't hold a position. I will tell you. So 2 answers, and I think Br.Cyrus is going to disagree with me. Yes, you should vote, but we're not voting for anybody who supported genocide. No one who supported genocide. No, those aren't the only options. And the reason why I say this is because, to quote the Al-Marhum Malcolm X, Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, he said, your ballot is like a bullet. Withholding your bullet because there's no good target is just as much of a move as it is throwing your bullet at it because you found a target. We have a target. There are genocidaires who are in the White House right now who have spent the last year satiating themselves with the blood of our brothers and sisters. And they're running for re-election, and they're acting like we don't exist and our vote does not matter. This year, our vote is not to, quote-unquote, build access. This year, our vote is to disrupt and protest.
I'll take the more extreme position to make his position look more reasonable by default. I think that this is choosing a pharaoh. We are electing the pharaoh. I think whoever occupies the White House is committed by a system bigger than his or herself to be an enemy to Islam, to oppose Islam. And so I think if we were to unite around a statement, right, or a position, a platform, I think it would shake up, even if our goal, we're sending a message to the US state, I think that we would send a much stronger message by agreeing, making a big deal publicly out of our disinterest in voting, right? To send the message that we see what you offer us, and we have broken the allegiance in our hearts, and we are disengaging, and we are not sending $1 to any of you, right? That we are investing in our community and in our ummah globally and in our resistance, and we're going to build an alternative. I think that would be a stronger message to send to the government. I think it will freak them out, and I think it will put us in a better position